There are certain kinds of pain that don't arrive loudly. They don't explode. They don't scream. They simply stand in front of you quietly and change the way you see your own family forever. For me, it happened outside room 614 at Mercy General Hospital in Chicago. The hallway smelled like bleach and burnt coffee. Nurses pushed carts past me while newborn babies cried softly behind closed doors. Families stood hugging each other near the windows. Grandparents wiped tears from their faces. Men carried balloons and flowers through the maternity ward like proud kings. And there I stood, alone, holding a small cream colored baby blanket against my chest. I have knitted it myself over the last 4 months. Tiny blue stitching around the edges, little embroidered stars in the corners. I imagined wrapping my grandson in it the first time I held him, but suddenly I wasn't sure I would hold him at all. My son stood near the hospital room door, rubbing his forehead nervously. Jason Dawson, my only child. I am 41 years old now, and somehow, at that moment, he looked like a complete stranger. "Mom," he said quietly. The way he said it already made my stomach tighten. I looked past him toward the hospital room. I could hear movement inside, soft voices, a baby crying, my grandson. My grandson was only a few feet away from me. I smiled weakly. "Can I come in now?" Jason hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. He looked down the hallway before finally speaking. "Emily doesn't want visitors right now." Visitors. The word hit me strangely. Visitors. Like I was a neighbor dropping by unexpectedly. Like I wasn't the woman who raised him alone after his father died. Like I wasn't the grandmother of the child inside that room. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I'm not a visitor, Jason." "I know, Mom, but she's exhausted." I swallowed hard. "I came 12 hours on a bus to be here. I told you the timing might be difficult." Difficult. Another cold word. The baby cried again inside the room. My heart physically ached hearing it. I took a small step toward the door. "I just want to see him for 1 minute." Jason immediately blocked the doorway. Not aggressively, not violently, which somehow hurt even more. Just enough to remind me, "You are not welcome here." "She only wants close family around right now," he said quietly. Close family. For a second, I honestly stopped breathing. I stared at my son's face, waiting for him to realize what he had just said, waiting for him to correct himself. He didn't. Behind him, I heard laughter inside the room. A woman's voice. Emily's mother. I had seen dozens of pictures online already. She was there for everything. The gender reveal, the baby shower, the nursery shopping, the maternity photos. Meanwhile, I watched everything through Facebook posts and silence. And now she was inside the delivery room holding my grandson, while I stood outside like a stranger asking permission. My fingers tightened around the blanket. The yarn suddenly felt rough against my skin. "I'm family," I whispered. Jason sighed heavily. "Mom, please don't make this harder than it already is." That sentence broke something inside me. Not loudly, quietly, like glass cracking beneath water. Because he wasn't speaking to me like a son anymore. He was speaking to me like a problem, a complication, an inconvenience standing in the hallway. A nurse walked past us awkwardly, pretending not to notice. I suddenly became aware of how humiliating the moment looked. An older woman standing outside a maternity room, being denied access to her own grandchild. I lowered my eyes quickly. I refused to cry there, not in public, not where strangers could pity me. Inside the room, the baby cried again. And then I heard Emily laugh softly. I never even got to hear her ask for me. Maybe she never did. Jason crossed his arms nervously. Maybe come back tomorrow. Tomorrow. As if first moments could be repeated. As if missing the first day of my grandson's life didn't matter. I looked down at the blanket one last time, then slowly held it out toward him. I made this for him. Jason took it awkwardly. Thanks. Just thanks. Not, he'll love it. Not, Mom, I'm sorry. Just thanks. Then the hospital room door opened slightly. Emily's mother appeared, smiling with the baby in her arms. For one beautiful, terrible second, I saw him. Tiny face, dark curls, little blue cap. My grandson. My entire body moved instinctively toward him. But Emily's mother immediately stepped backward, protective, cold, like I might contaminate the moment just by standing there. Oh, she said awkwardly. I didn't realize. She never finished the sentence, because Jason quickly turned toward her and lowered his voice. It's okay. Mom was just leaving. Mom was just leaving. I felt my throat tighten so hard it hurt. Inside the room, Emily never appeared once. Not once. Jason looked back at me carefully. I'll send pictures later. I nodded slowly because I could no longer trust my voice. Then I turned around and walked down the hallway alone. I remember the sound of my shoes against the hospital floor more than anything else. Slow, heavy, embarrassing. Families smiled around me while I walked toward the elevators carrying empty hands. When the elevator doors finally closed, I looked at my reflection in the metal walls. Tired eyes, gray curls, wrinkled hands. I suddenly looked exactly like what they saw me as. An old woman nobody needed anymore. And somewhere 6 floors above me, my grandson entered the world believing everyone important was already in the room. My name is Margaret Dawson. I'm 63 years old. And for most of my life, I believed being a mother meant giving until there was nothing left of yourself. Not because someone asked you to, because love made you want to. I had Jason when I was 22 years old. Back then, we lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat in Milwaukee. The floors creaked constantly. The heating barely worked during winter. And every Friday night, the smell of bleach drifted through the vents from downstairs. But when Jason was born, none of that mattered to me, because the moment I held him, my entire life suddenly had direction. He had thick, dark hair even as a baby, big brown eyes, tiny fingers that wrapped around mine like he already trusted me completely. I remember sitting awake at night just watching him breathe in his crib, terrified something bad might happen if I looked away too long. That's what motherhood felt like to me. Fear, love, responsibility, all tangled together forever. Jason's father, Michael, worked construction downtown. He was gentle, quiet, the kind of man who kissed my forehead every morning before work, even after 10 years of marriage. We weren't rich, but we were happy, at least until the phone rang one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I still remember the sound of it, sharp, suddenly, the kind of phone call that divides your life into before and after. Michael had fallen from scaffolding at a construction site, 3 stories. They told me he died instantly, but no sentence can soften something like that. Jason was only 11 years old when we buried his father. I'll never forget him standing beside me at the funeral, wearing a black suit that was slightly too big for his skinny body. His hands shook the entire service. That night, he crawled into my bed crying. "Don't leave me too, Mom." I wrapped my arms around him and promised, "I never will," and I meant it. God help me. I meant every word. After Michael died, life became survival. I worked mornings at a grocery store, stocking shelves. At night, I cleaned office buildings downtown. Some days I barely slept 4 hours. My hands cracked during winter from chemicals and cold air. My knees hurt constantly, but Jason never knew how scared I was. I hid overdue bills inside kitchen drawers before he got home from school. I skipped meals sometimes so there would be enough groceries for him. When he wanted basketball shoes in 8th grade, I sold my wedding ring quietly at a pawn shop 3 neighborhoods away. I told him I lost it. He cried harder than I did. You loved that ring. I still have your father, I told him. I pointed at his chest when I said it. Jason hugged me for almost a full minute. Back then, he looked at me like I was his entire world. And maybe I was. For years, it was just us. Friday pizza nights, homework at the kitchen table, movie marathons during snowstorms. Sometimes, when money was tight, we'd sit on the apartment roof eating cheap burgers while looking at city lights, pretending we were rich. Jason used to laugh so hard during those nights. You know what, Mom? He once told me at 16. When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a huge house with a giant kitchen. I smiled. What would I do with a giant kitchen? You won't have to work anymore. The sincerity in his eyes nearly broke me, because children mean the things they say when they still love you openly. The years passed fast after that, too fast. Jason became the first person in our family to attend college. The day his acceptance letter arrived from Northwestern University, he ran into the apartment shouting so loudly the neighbors knocked on the wall. We did it, Mom. We. That word used to mean everything to him. I remember driving him to campus with his clothes folded inside garbage bags because we couldn't afford proper luggage. I apologized for the whole drive. Jason squeezed my hand at a red light. Stop saying sorry. You gave me everything. At the dorm entrance, he hugged me tightly before unloading his bags. Then he looked at me seriously. I'll take care of you one day, I promise. That promise stayed in my heart for years, even after things started changing. At first, the changes were small. Missed calls, shorter conversations, more excuses. College became work. Work became promotions. Promotions became business dinners and flights and networking events. Jason became successful, exactly what I had prayed for. He moved to Chicago, bought expensive suits, started using words like investments and equity during conversations. Sometimes when he spoke now, I barely understood half of what he was talking about. But I still listened proudly, because every achievement of his felt like proof that the sacrifices mattered. Then one Thanksgiving, he brought Emily home, and without realizing it, that was the beginning of the distance between us. I noticed it immediately. Not because Emily was rude exactly. She was simply the kind of beautiful woman who entered rooms already deciding where everyone belonged. Elegant beige coat, diamond earrings, perfect posture. Even her smile felt practiced. At dinner, she complimented my cooking politely while barely touching the food. This neighborhood has character, she said while glancing out my apartment window. Character. I understood what she really meant. Old, small, working class, embarrassing. Jason spent the entire evening watching her reactions instead of mine. Every laugh, every expression, every comment, like he was terrified she might disapprove of something. And slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, I started realizing my son no longer saw me through his own eyes. He saw me through hers. That realization hurt more than any exhaustion I survived as a single mother. Because tiredness heals eventually. But emotional replacement, that pain settles somewhere permanent. The first time Jason told me Emily was pregnant, I cried so hard I had to sit down at my kitchen table. I had waited years to hear those words. Years. Most women my age talked constantly about their grandchildren, pictures and wallets, birthday visits, tiny shoes by the front door. Meanwhile, I kept pretending it didn't bother me that my apartment stayed painfully quiet. So when Jason called that evening, his voice almost nervous with excitement. My heart immediately lifted. Mom. The way he said it reminded me of the little boy who used to run home holding spelling test papers. What is it? I asked quickly. There was a pause. Then, you're going to be a grandmother. I covered my mouth instantly. Oh my God. Jason laughed softly. You okay? I started crying before I could answer. Not loud crying, the kind that sneaks out of older people quietly because life has taught them how to hold emotions in. I'm okay, I whispered. I'm just happy. And I truly was. For the first time in years, I felt needed again, important again, connected again. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining tiny hands, little footsteps, Christmas mornings. I even pulled out Jason's old baby photos from the hallway closet. There he was at 6 months old, sitting in spaghetti sauce. At age 5, wearing rain boots in summer. At 12, pretending not to cry after Michael's funeral. I stared at those pictures for hours. Then I smiled to myself and whispered, You're going to be a father. The thought felt impossible and beautiful at the same time. The next morning, I drove straight to a craft store and bought soft yarn, cream colored, blue, pale gray. I started knitting that same evening blankets, socks, tiny hats. My fingers hurt after a few hours, but I didn't care. Every stitch felt like love. Every stitch felt like preparation for becoming part of something again. At first, Jason called often during the pregnancy. He updated me after appointments, tell me about ultrasound pictures, mentioned nursery colors. For a little while, things almost felt normal again. Then slowly, Emily began taking over everything. One evening, Jason sent me a group text. Emily had created a private family baby registry. Private family. I noticed immediately that I hadn't been added initially. Jason corrected it later and claimed it was an accident. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. Over the next few months, I watched the pregnancy happen mostly through social media. Professional maternity photos appeared online. Emily stands in flowing cream dresses beside lakes and flower gardens. Her mother appeared in every picture, holding Emily's stomach, laughing beside her, helping decorate the nursery. Meanwhile, I sat alone in Milwaukee, zooming into Facebook photos like an outsider, trying to study another family's happiness. Sometimes I would type comments under the posts. Beautiful. So excited for you both. Can't wait to meet him. Most of the time, Emily never responded. But her friends did. Her mother did. Strangers did. Not her. I kept telling myself not to take it personally. Pregnancy is stressful. Young couples are busy. Chicago is far away. I made excuses constantly because mothers become experts at protecting their children from guilt, even when the child hurting them is fully grown. One Saturday afternoon, I finally visited Chicago for the baby shower. I spent almost $300 on the trip. New dress, hotel room, gift basket. Money I honestly should not have spent. But this was my first grandchild. I wanted everything to feel special. When I arrived at the restaurant banquet hall, I immediately realized something felt off. Most of the guests were Emily's family, elegant women in expensive dresses, doctors, lawyers, business owners, people who spoke confidently about wine vacations and private schools. I suddenly became deeply aware of my discount department store heels. Jason hugged me quickly when I entered. You made it. Of course I made it. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. But then he looked distracted almost immediately. Emily called him from across the room, and he rushed away before even helping me with my coat. I stood there awkwardly holding my purse while strangers glanced politely in my direction. Eventually, I found my name at a table near the back corner. Not beside Jason, not beside Emily, not beside family. Near coworkers, people I had never met before. I stared at the seating card for several seconds. Margaret Dawson, table 9. Something about that tiny folded card hurt more than it should have, because seating arrangements reveal things people don't say out loud. I watched Emily's mother move comfortably through the room, greeting guests like she was hosting a royal event. Everyone knew her, everyone surrounded her. Meanwhile, I sat quietly smiling at strangers while pretending I didn't notice how invisible I felt. At one point during the shower, I played a game where guests wrote advice cards for the baby. I spent almost 20 minutes carefully writing mine. Always let him know he is loved, even when life becomes difficult. That feeling will protect him longer than money ever can. I folded the card carefully and placed it in the basket. Later, while guests laughed nearby, I noticed several cards being read aloud publicly. People clapped and smiled. Mine was never chosen. Maybe that sounds childish. Maybe it is. But when you're slowly being erased from your own family, you begin noticing every small exclusion, every silence, every forgotten moment. Every seat was placed too far away. By the end of the evening, I still hadn't touched Emily's stomach once. Other women had, dozens of times. But every time I moved near her, somehow someone else stepped between us naturally, like an invisible wall always appeared. As the party ended, I finally hugged Jason goodbye near the valet entrance. "When's the due date again?" I asked softly. "November 18th. I smiled. "I'll come as soon as labor starts." Jason hesitated. Only for a second, but I saw it. That hesitation again. The same hesitation from people trying not to disappoint you, while already planning to. "We'll let you know," he said carefully. "We'll let you know. Not, 'we want you there.' Not, 'of course, Mom.' Just uncertainty." I nodded like the words didn't wound me. Then I drove back to Milwaukee alone in complete silence. 4 hours through rain and dark highways. At some point during the drive, I realized something painful. I had spent the entire baby shower trying to earn a place that should have already belonged to me naturally. And once you start begging emotionally for inclusion inside your own family, the humiliation has already begun. The call came at 2:13 in the morning. I know the exact time because older people don't sleep deeply anymore, especially mothers. Especially mothers waiting for news that might change their life forever. My phone vibrated against the nightstand beside my bed, pulling me awake instantly. For one terrifying second, I thought someone had died. Calls after midnight rarely bring good news. I grabbed my glasses quickly and answered before the second ring. "Jason?" His voice sounded rushed, breathless. "It's happening." My heart jumped immediately. "Emily's in labor?" "Yeah, we're at Mercy General now." I sat upright so fast the blanket slid onto the floor. Oh my God. I looked toward the half packed suitcase sitting beside my closet. I had kept it ready for almost 3 weeks. Baby blanket, tiny stuffed bear, fresh clothes, travel snacks. I had prepared like someone waiting for the most important moment of her life. "When should I leave?" I asked quickly. There was a pause, a strange pause, long enough for anxiety to quietly enter the room. Jason cleared his throat. "Well, labor might take a while." I frowned slightly. "That's okay. I can still come." Another pause. Then, "Maybe wait until morning." The excitement inside me dimmed a little. Why? Emily's stressed. I stared into the darkness of my bedroom. She's giving birth, Jason. Of course she's stressed. I just mean, there are already a lot of people here. A lot of people. I already knew who that meant. Emily's parents, Emily's sister, Emily's friends. People who apparently counted as comfort, while I somehow counted as pressure. I forced a smile into my voice anyway. "I won't bother anyone. It's not about bothering people." The carefulness in his tone made my stomach tighten. He was choosing his words too carefully. That's how you know someone is trying to avoid guilt. I lowered my voice. Jason, do you want me there? Silence. Real silence this time. Not static, not a distraction. Silence. And suddenly I understood everything before he even answered. We'll update you, he finally said. Not yes, no, just distance. I swallowed hard and nodded even though he couldn't see me. Okay, try to get some sleep. Sleep. As if that was possible now. After we hung up, I sat motionless in bed, staring at the wall. The apartment felt painfully quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed softly in the kitchen. Cars hissed through wet streets outside. A clock ticked somewhere near the hallway. And all I could think was, he doesn't want me there. I tried convincing myself I was imagining things. Maybe Emily was overwhelmed. Maybe hospitals had restrictions. Maybe younger couples just handled things differently now. I spent the next 2 hours making excuses for people who were slowly pushing me out of their lives. At 6 in the morning, I finally gave up pretending. I showered. I curled my hair carefully, put on my nicest navy cardigan. Then I picked up my suitcase, because regardless of what anybody said, that was still my grandson being born. The bus station downtown smelled like diesel fuel and old coffee. I sat near the window, clutching my ticket while people shuffled around me half asleep. College students, construction workers, young mothers carrying toddlers. Normal life continued around me while my heart pounded uncontrollably. During the ride, I kept checking my phone every few minutes. No updates, no pictures, nothing. 7 hours later, Jason finally texted. She's still in labor. No photo, no warmth, no hurry, just information. I stared at the message for almost a full minute before replying. How is she doing? 3 hours passed before he answered. Tired. That was it. By the time the bus reached Chicago, evening shadows had already stretched across downtown buildings. Rain drizzled softly against the windows. I checked into a cheap motel 3 blocks from the hospital because every nearby hotel was too expensive. The room smelled faintly like smoke, even though the front desk clerk promised it was non-smoking. I placed my suitcase beside the bed and immediately checked my phone again. Still nothing. I sat there staring at the wallpaper while anxiety slowly turned into humiliation. Why wasn't he calling me? Why wasn't he sharing this moment with me? I remembered how different things were when Jason was born. Michael had called every relative immediately, even people we barely spoke to, because joy naturally expands. It includes people. But this felt controlled, selective, like access to the baby had become something people earned. Around midnight, my phone finally rang again. I answered instantly. Jason? His voice sounded exhausted. The baby's here. My eyes filled immediately. Oh my God. It's a boy. A boy. My grandson. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying not to cry too loudly. What does he look like? Jason laughed softly for the first time in days. He has a lot of hair. Just like you did, I almost said. Instead, I whispered, Can I come now? That question changed everything. The warmth vanished from his voice instantly. Mom. There it was again, that hesitation, that careful tone people use before hurting you. Emily's really overwhelmed right now. My heart sank slowly. I'll only stay a minute. She's exhausted. I understand. She only wants immediate family around tonight. Immediate family. I felt physically cold hearing those words, because no matter how politely he phrased it, the meaning stayed the same. You are outside the circle. I stared at the motel window while rain slid slowly down the glass. Somewhere only a few blocks away, my grandson had entered the world, and I wasn't wanted near him. not by strangers, by my own son. I finally asked the question I had been avoiding for months. Did Emily say she doesn't want me there? Jason exhaled heavily. Mom, please don't do this tonight. That answer told me everything. I closed my eyes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, so quietly I almost didn't recognize my own voice, I asked, since when did I stop being family to you? After that phone call, I sat alone in the motel room for nearly an hour without moving. The rain kept tapping softly against the window. Cars hissed through wet streets below. Somewhere nearby, a siren echoed through downtown Chicago. But inside that tiny room, everything felt still, heavy, like life had quietly shifted into something I didn't recognize anymore. I kept replaying Jason's words over and over. She only wants immediate family around tonight. Immediate family. The cruelty of that sentence wasn't loud. That's what made it hurt so much. Nobody insulted me directly. Nobody screamed at me. Nobody called me names. They simply removed me emotionally, quietly, politely, completely, and somehow that felt worse. I looked toward the cream-colored baby blanket folded carefully beside my suitcase. The tiny blue stars I embroidered suddenly looked foolish, too hopeful, like something made by a woman who still believed love guaranteed belonging. Around 2 in the morning, I finally turned off the motel lamp and laid down. But every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the hospital room, Emily holding the baby. Her mother was beside her. Jason smiled proudly, a complete family picture, without me. I must have slept eventually because sunlight woke me through the curtains a few hours later. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality returned instantly. My grandson was born, and I still hadn't held him. I reached for my phone immediately. No messages, no pictures, nothing. The emptiness of that screen hit harder than I expected. I sat there staring at it for several seconds before finally opening Facebook. And there it was. Emily's mother had already posted photos. Welcome to the world, sweet Ethan. 3 pictures. One of Jason crying while holding the baby. One of Emily smiling weakly in the hospital bed. One family picture beside the bassinet. Her parents were in it. Her sister too. Everyone looked exhausted and happy and connected. I zoomed into the photo slowly, looking for any sign of me, as if maybe they had accidentally included something proving I still mattered. But of course they hadn't. I wasn't there. Thousands of people would now see my grandson before I ever did. Friends from church, old neighbors, former classmates, strangers. Everyone except his grandmother. My chest tightened painfully. Still, I got dressed, because some stubborn part of me refused to believe things were truly this bad. I told myself, maybe emotions settled overnight. Maybe Emily rested. Maybe Jason would feel guilty in person. So I curled my hair carefully again, applied lipstick, pressed my cardigan smooth. Then I picked up the baby blanket and walked 3 blocks through the cold morning wind toward Mercy General Hospital. The maternity floor looked different during daylight, brighter, busier, filled with flowers and balloons. A young man passed me carrying pink roses while grinning into his phone. 2 older women stood near the nurse's station discussing baby names excitedly. Everywhere I looked, families were celebrating. I suddenly became deeply aware of how alone I looked. When I reached room 614, the door was partially closed. I could hear voices inside, laughter. My heart started pounding immediately. I raised my hand to knock, then froze, because I heard Emily speaking. I just wanted peaceful energy around the baby. Her mother answered softly, "You did the right thing." Then Emily laughed quietly. "I can't deal with emotional people right now." Emotional people. I stared at the hospital door as heat rushed into my face. For 30 years, I had sacrificed everything for my son. Now I was being discussed like some unstable inconvenience outside a room I wasn't allowed to enter. Jason said something too quietly for me to hear. Then Emily replied, "She makes everything about herself." That sentence physically hurt. Not emotionally, physically. Like someone pressing something sharp directly into my chest. Because mothers carry invisible guilt constantly. Even good mothers. And hearing your child's wife describe you that way makes you immediately question your entire existence. Had I done too much? Loved too hard? Stayed too available? Needed too much from him emotionally? I stood there, holding the blanket while strangers walked past me in the hallway. Nobody knew the grandmother of the baby inside the room was standing outside listening to herself become unwanted. A nurse approached gently. "Can I help you?" I quickly wiped beneath my eyes before tears could fall. "I'm here to see my grandson." She smiled kindly. "Oh, congratulations." The word almost broke me. Congratulations. For what? Being excluded? The nurse glanced toward the room. "Have they approved visitors?" Approved. Even that word sounded humiliating now. Before I could answer, the door suddenly opened. Jason stepped out. The moment he saw me, tension covered his entire face. "Mom." I tried smiling anyway. It probably looked painful. "I just wanted to stop by for a minute." Jason immediately glanced back toward the room nervously. "She's resting." I looked past him instinctively, and there he was, my grandson, tiny, wrapped in white, sleeping peacefully beside Emily's bed. The sight stole my breath completely. I had never seen anything so beautiful. Every instinct inside me screamed to walk forward, to hold him, kiss him, memorize him. Instead, I stayed standing in the hallway like someone asking permission to enter a stranger's house. "Please," I whispered, "just let me see him for 1 minute." Jason rubbed his forehead. "You're making this harder." Harder. Everything was apparently harder because of me. Loving him was harder. Showing up was harder. Being his mother was harder. Behind him, Emily turned her head toward the doorway, finally noticing me. Our eyes met for only a second. Her expression didn't look angry, which somehow hurt even more. It looked irritating, tired, like she genuinely couldn't understand why I was still there. Then she said the sentence I will never forget for the rest of my life. "Jason, please." Not even my name, just, "Please remove this problem." Jason stepped further into the doorway, blocking my view of the baby completely. And quietly, carefully, like a man trying to avoid a scene, he said, "Mom, maybe it's better if you come back after we're home." Something inside me finally cracked then. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet realization settling into my bones. They didn't want me in their joy. They only wanted me at a distance where I couldn't interfere with the version of family they had created. And for the first time, I stopped begging emotionally to be included. I went back to Milwaukee that same afternoon. No goodbye, no hug, no invitation to return, just silence. The bus ride home felt longer than the trip there. Outside the window, gray skies stretched endlessly across frozen highways while everyone around me lived ordinary lives. A teenage couple argued softly 2 rows behind me. An older man snored near the aisle. Someone watched videos without headphones until the driver yelled at them. Normal life continued. Meanwhile, my heart felt like it had been quietly removed from my chest somewhere between Chicago and Wisconsin. I kept replaying the hospital hallway in my mind. Jason blocking the doorway. Emily turned her face away. The sound of my grandson crying inside the room. And worst of all, the look on my son's face. Not hatred. That would have almost been easier. No. It was uncomfortable, like my love embarrassed him. That realization haunted me more than anything else. When I finally unlocked my apartment that evening, the silence hit me immediately. No husband, no children, no family noise. Just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking wall clock near the kitchen. I placed my suitcase beside the couch and stood there for several seconds without moving. The apartment suddenly felt smaller than ever before, older, lonelier. I slowly unpacked the baby gifts one by one: the extra knitted blanket, tiny socks, storybooks I bought at the airport. I placed everything carefully into a storage bin beneath my bed because I couldn't bear looking at them anymore. Then I sat alone at the kitchen table while darkness filled the apartment around me. At some point during the night, my phone buzzed. For one stupid, hopeful second, I thought it was Jason apologizing. Instead, it was a picture message, a family photo. Emily in the hospital bed smiling weakly. Jason holding the baby proudly. Emily's parents standing beside them. The caption simply read, "Baby Ethan and his family." His family. I stared at those two words until my vision blurred. No explanation. No, "sorry about earlier." No invitation to visit. Just a picture showing me exactly where I stood now, outside the frame. I didn't reply. 3 days passed, then 4. No calls, no updates. I checked Facebook more than I want to admit. Every new post hurts in fresh ways. Emily's mother bathes the baby. Emily's sister bottle feeding him. Jason asleep holding Ethan against his chest. Strangers online commented things like, "He's surrounded by so much love." I would stare at those comments quietly, wondering if anyone understood how painful invisibility actually feels. Because absence becomes its own kind of grief, especially when people erase you while you're still alive. Then, on the 5th morning, everything changed. I was making coffee when my phone rang from an unknown Chicago number. At first, I ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Hello? Good morning, Mrs. Dawson. This is Mercy General Billing Department." Immediately, my stomach tightened. Billing Department? The woman sounded professional but rushed. "We're calling regarding the outstanding balance connected to your son Jason Dawson and his wife Emily Parker." I frowned. I don't understand. There was typing in the background. "Your name was listed as the financial guarantor for remaining maternity expenses." For a moment, I honestly thought I heard her wrong. "I'm sorry, what?" "The remaining balance after insurance is currently $8,742. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The coffee machine continued dripping behind me while my pulse pounded loudly in my ears. "My son listed me?" "Yes, ma'am. You were entered as an emergency financial responsibility contact." Emergency financial responsibility. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because the cruelty of it felt unbelievable. Again, and again, and again. By evening, the voicemails started. "Mom, call me back." Then, "We need to figure this out." Then, "I don't understand why you're doing this." Doing this. Interesting choice of words. As though I had suddenly become cruel out of nowhere. As though the hospital hallway never happened. I still didn't respond. Around 9 that night, another text appeared. "The hospital says you refused responsibility." I stared at the message quietly. Refused responsibility. For 30 years, responsibility had practically been my identity. I worked double shifts, paid tuition, covered emergencies, helped with rent after college, sent money during layoffs. I spent most of my adult life solving problems before Jason even noticed they existed. But suddenly, the one time I protected myself, I became irresponsible. My chest tightened painfully, not because of anger, because somewhere deep inside me, a small broken part still hoped my son would eventually understand what he had done. Then another message arrived. This could damage our credit. Our. Now it was our problem. Not, Mom, I'm sorry. Not, you deserved better. Just finances, debt, consequences. I placed the phone face down on the table and walked to the sink because I suddenly felt nauseous. Outside, snow drifted softly past the parking lot lights. Everything looked calm, but inside me something was collapsing slowly. I barely slept that night. Every memory kept replaying in fragments. Jason at 11 years old, crying after his father's funeral. Jason hugged me before college. Jason promised he'd take care of me one day. And then, Jason standing in front of that hospital room, blocking the doorway. The contrast between those memories felt unbearable. Around 6 the next morning, my phone rang again. This time I answered. Not because I was ready, because I was tired. Hello? Jason exhaled sharply with relief. Finally. No, how are you? No, can we talk? Just frustration. I sat slowly at the kitchen table. What do you need, Jason? There was a pause. Then immediately, why would you refuse the bill? Straight to the point. No apology first, no acknowledgement of the humiliation. Only the money mattered. I looked down at my hands quietly. Wrinkles, dry skin, small scars from years of work. Those hands built his life, and suddenly they trembled. You listed me as financially responsible without asking me. It was temporary. You still did it. Jason sighed loudly. Mom, you're overreacting. Overreacting. The favorite word people use when they don't want to examine their own cruelty. I laughed softly. Not happily, just tired. You didn't even let me hold my grandson. That's not fair. Fair? My voice cracked slightly. You told me I wasn't in the immediate family. Silence. Then, that's not what I meant. But it was exactly what he meant. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not maliciously, but meaning and impact are not always the same thing. I closed my eyes briefly. I stood outside that hospital room like a stranger. Emily had just given birth, and her mother held the baby before I even saw his face. Jason's breathing became heavier. You're making this into something bigger than it is. That sentence finally broke the last piece of hope I was holding on to. Because of him. My pain was still inconvenient, still an exaggeration, still drama, never valid. I whispered softly, You humiliated me. He immediately sounded defensive. No one humiliated you. I laughed again quietly. This time there were tears in my eyes. Jason, I rode a 12-hour bus to Chicago carrying gifts for my grandson. I swallowed hard. And your wife spoke about me outside that hospital room like I was some emotional burden she needed removed. Jason said nothing. That silence told me he knew. Maybe he heard it too. Maybe part of him understood the truth all along. Then finally he said the sentence that changed everything forever. Emily was right about you. The room went completely still. I honestly thought I misunderstood him. What? He exhaled heavily. She said you'd make this moment about yourself eventually. Something inside me physically collapsed hearing that. Not because of Emily. Her opinion didn't truly matter. But because my son believed her. That was the real wound. After everything, after every sacrifice, after every year of protecting him, the woman who entered our lives less than a decade ago now understood me better than I understood myself, at least in his eyes. I pressed my hand against my mouth, trying to breathe normally. Jason kept talking, his voice frustrated now. We're exhausted, Mom. We have a newborn. We can't deal with emotional guilt right now. Emotional guilt. Interesting phrase. People often call consequences guilt when they don't want accountability. I looked around my tiny apartment slowly. The faded curtains, the old kitchen table, the framed photo of Jason graduating college. I suddenly realized something painful. I had spent years making myself emotionally smaller so my son could stay comfortable. Every ignored call, every forgotten holiday, every dismissal. I swallowed it quietly because I was afraid speaking honestly might push him away. But silence never protected the relationship. It only protected the disrespect. When I finally spoke again, my voice sounded calmer than I expected. You know what hurts most? Jason stayed quiet. It's not the hospital. I wiped tears from my cheeks slowly. It's realizing you only remembered I was family when someone needed to pay. Silence. Long silence. Then Jason said coldly, "That's not fair." Fair. There was that word again, as though fairness had existed anywhere in this situation. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. You're right. Another pause. Then softly, softly enough that it almost scared me, I said, I think we should stop talking for a while. Jason immediately sounded alarmed. Mom, don't do that. But for the first time in years, I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was protecting myself, and there's a difference. I love you, I whispered. Then I added the sentence I never imagined saying to my only child. But I can't keep begging to be treated like family. After that phone call, the silence between us became complete. No calls, no messages, no pictures of Ethan, nothing. At first, I kept checking my phone constantly anyway. Every morning, every night, every time it buzzed. Some foolish part of me still expected my son to come back emotionally, to wake up one day ashamed, to realize what he had done, to say, Mom, I'm sorry, but the apology never came. Weeks passed, then months. Winter disappeared slowly from Milwaukee's streets, replaced by cold rain and gray skies. Life moved forward whether my heart was ready or not. That's the cruel thing about loneliness. The world keeps functioning normally while your private grief quietly rearranges your entire identity. At church, people kept asking polite questions. How's the baby? Have you visited yet? You must be so happy. I became skilled at smiling. Older women become experts at hiding pain gracefully. Oh, they're busy. He's beautiful. You know how young parents are. Half truths became easier than humiliation because the truth sounded too pathetic out loud. My son's wife didn't want me near my grandson. Even saying the sentence inside my own head still hurts. One afternoon, my friend Carol invited me for lunch downtown. She had been widowed around the same time I lost Michael. Unlike me, Carol learned how to rebuild herself after grief. I spent years rebuilding Jason instead. There's a difference. Over soup and coffee, she studied my face carefully. You look tired. I'm fine. She gave me a look only old friends can give, the kind that sees straight through lies. No, she said softly. You look heartbroken. That sentence nearly made me cry right there in the restaurant, because nobody had asked about my pain directly in months. Everyone focused on the baby, the marriage, the new family. Nobody asked what exclusion does to a mother. I looked down into my coffee quietly. I think I spent so many years being needed that I forgot how to exist when I wasn't. Carol reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Margaret, she whispered gently, children grow up, but you're still allowed to have a life. A life. The phrase sounded strange. For decades, my entire identity revolved around motherhood. Jason's schedules, Jason's needs, Jason's future. And now, the role that once defined my existence had become conditional, useful only when convenient. That realization nearly destroyed me. But strangely, it also freed me. Slowly, I began changing things. Small things at first. I joined Carol's gardening club on Thursdays. I started taking morning walks near Lake Michigan again. I volunteered twice a week at church, helping elderly shut-ins with groceries and appointments. And for the first time in years, I began noticing how many older people carried invisible loneliness quietly. Parents abandoned emotionally by adult children. Widows forgotten after funerals ended. Grandparents were treated like optional decorations instead of family. One woman I met, Eleanor, hadn't seen her daughter in almost 4 years. Yet every birthday she still mailed gifts to grandchildren she barely knew. I keep hoping one day they'll remember me, she admitted softly. That sentence stayed with me for days, because hope can become dangerous when it traps you inside humiliation. I started realizing something painful. I had spent most of my life believing love meant endurance. Endure disappointment, endure disrespect, endure emotional neglect, because mothers are taught that unconditional love means endless forgiveness. But there's a difference between love and emotional self-erasure, and for the first time in my life, I began learning that difference. Then one rainy November evening, almost 11 months after Ethan's birth, my phone rang. Unknown Chicago number. I almost ignored it. Something told me not to. Hello? A woman answered carefully. Mrs. Dawson? Yes? My name is Angela Ruiz. I'm a social worker at Mercy Family Services. Immediately my stomach tightened. Social worker? Is Ethan okay? Yes, she said quickly. Your grandson is physically safe. Physically safe. The wording terrified me. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. What happened? There was a pause before she answered. Your daughter-in-law experienced severe postpartum depression after the birth. I closed my eyes briefly. Somewhere deep inside me, guilt flashed instantly. Not because I caused it, because mothers blame themselves for everything automatically. The social worker continued carefully. Your son recently lost his job during downsizing. I stared blankly at the wall. He lost his job? Yes. Financial stress escalated significantly afterward. Suddenly, pieces started connecting in my mind. The hospital debt, the desperation, the silence. The woman lowered her voice slightly. Emily suffered a breakdown 2 nights ago. My chest tightened. What kind of breakdown? She collapsed while alone with the baby. Neighbors called emergency services after hearing screaming. I covered my mouth slowly. Not out of judgment, out of sadness. Because despite everything, I never truly hated Emily. I hated what she allowed fear to turn her into. The social worker kept speaking. Emily's parents have been helping, but they're elderly themselves and overwhelmed. Then came the sentence that changed everything. We're trying to identify stable family support for Ethan temporarily. Family support. Interesting phrase. I looked around my apartment quietly, the same apartment where I cried for months after being excluded from my grandson's life. Now suddenly, I mattered again. The social worker asked gently, would you be willing to come to Chicago? I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know, because part of me was finally acknowledging the truth. They never imagined I might stop rescuing them someday. And for the first time in my life, I had to decide whether compassion should cost me my dignity again. After the social worker hung up, I sat alone at my kitchen table for a very long time. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the apartment glowed dimly beneath the yellow light above the stove. Everything felt strangely familiar. The silence, the loneliness, the waiting. Except this time, I wasn't the one begging to be chosen. Now they needed me. And somehow that realization hurt almost as much as the rejection itself. I looked around my apartment slowly. The framed photographs, the knitted blankets folded neatly beside the couch, the old clock Michael bought me 20 years earlier. This little place had witnessed every version of me: young wife, terrified widow, exhausted single mother, lonely grandmother, and now something else. A woman finally learning the difference between love and sacrifice. I barely slept that night. Part of me wanted to say no, not out of cruelty, out of self protection. Because once someone teaches you that your love is only valuable during emergencies, it becomes terrifying to offer your heart again. But every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Ethan, a little boy caught in the middle of adult pride and emotional damage. None of this belonged to him. By morning, I already knew my answer. I packed a small suitcase quietly, same navy cardigan, same careful folding, same long bus ride to Chicago. Only this time, everything felt different. The first trip had been filled with hope. This one carried clarity. When I arrived at Mercy Family Services the next afternoon, the social worker greeted me warmly near the lobby entrance. Angela Ruiz looked younger than I expected. Kind eyes, tired face, the face of someone who spent too much time witnessing broken families. "Mrs. Dawson?" I nodded. She shook my hand gently. "Thank you for coming." That sentence nearly broke me immediately. Thank you for coming. Such simple words, but after months of feeling unwanted, gratitude felt almost shocking. Angela guided me toward a small family waiting room upstairs. As we walked, she explained everything carefully. Emily's postpartum depression had worsened over time. Jason's job loss created financial panic. Arguments became constant. Sleep deprivation made everything worse. And eventually, they collapsed under the weight of it all. They were afraid to ask for help, Angela said softly. I almost laughed at the irony. Afraid to ask for help. No, they were afraid to admit they needed the person they pushed away. When we reached the waiting room door, Angela paused. There inside, my stomach tightened instantly. Suddenly, I felt nervous. Not angry, not bitter, just emotionally tired. Angela opened the door quietly. Jason stood up the moment he saw me, and for one painful second, I saw my little boy again. Not the cold man outside the hospital room, not the frustrated voice on the phone, just my son, broken. He looked thinner than before, dark circles beneath his eyes, wrinkled clothes, exhaustion covering every inch of him. And the moment our eyes met, he started crying. Not polite tears, not guilt, real crying. The kind people do when life finally strips away pride completely. "Mom," his voice cracked instantly. I stood frozen near the doorway while he walked toward me slowly. "I'm sorry." Those two words hit harder than I imagined they would. Because for months I convinced myself I no longer needed them. But pain changes when it's finally acknowledged. Jason covered his face briefly. "I'm so sorry." I looked at him quietly. Then slowly, I opened my arms, and my son collapsed into them exactly the way he did after Michael's funeral 29 years earlier. I held him while he cried against my shoulder, not because he deserved instant forgiveness, because no matter how badly people hurt us, love does not disappear overnight, especially maternal love. Across the room, Emily sat silently in a chair near the window. She looked fragile, not elegant anymore, not controlled, not superior, just tired. Humans. There were no perfect curls now, no polished makeup, no carefully managed image, only shame. For several seconds, she couldn't even look at me. Then quietly she whispered, "I didn't think you'd come." That sentence settled heavily in the room, because hidden inside it was the truth. They never expected my response to be compassion. After everything, they expected anger, revenge, punishment. Maybe they even deserved those things. But life had already punished them enough. I looked at Emily carefully. "You were suffering," I said softly. Her eyes filled instantly. "I was awful to you." I didn't answer immediately because honesty matters more than comfort sometimes. "Yes," I said quietly, "you were." Emily started crying harder. "I thought if Jason stayed too close to you, I'd always come second." There it was, the real reason. Fear. Not hatred, not cruelty for entertainment. Fear. Fear turns people selfish, possessive, defensive. And sometimes women compete emotionally with mothers when they don't understand that love is not a limited resource. Jason sat down heavily beside her. "I kept trying to keep everyone happy," he whispered. I looked at him sadly. "No," I said gently. "You kept choosing the person most likely to leave." That sentence silenced the room completely, because deep down, he knew it was true. Children often take unconditional love for granted because they believe it will survive anything, and most mothers allow that. I did for too long. Then the door opened softly, and finally, for the first time in my life, I met my grandson properly. Ethan. He sat quietly in a social worker's arms, holding a tiny stuffed dinosaur. Dark curls, big brown eyes. Jason's eyes. My entire body softened the moment I saw him. Angela smiled gently. "Ethan, this is your grandma." Grandma. The word hit me so deeply I almost cried instantly. Ethan studied me seriously for several seconds. Then he reached toward me, just instinctively, like children sometimes recognize love before adults do. The moment I held him, everything inside me cracked open emotionally. His tiny hand touched my necklace curiously. His head rested softly against my shoulder. And suddenly all the hospital pain returned at once. Because this was what they took from me: time, connection, memories, moments we could never get back. I closed my eyes briefly, holding him tighter. Then softly, very softly, I whispered, "Hi, sweetheart." That evening changed everything. Not perfectly, not magically. Healing never works that way. But honestly, over the next 3 months, I stayed in Chicago helping care for Ethan while Emily received treatment and Jason searched for work. But this time was different. I no longer begged for space. I no longer chased approval. And strangely, the moment I stopped sacrificing my dignity for love, they finally respected me. Jason started calling every morning before leaving interviews. Emily apologized repeatedly through actions instead of speeches. Small things: coffee in the morning, quiet conversations, genuine effort. One night after Ethan fell asleep, Jason sat beside me in the kitchen. "You know what destroys me most?" he asked quietly. I looked up from my tea. "What?" He swallowed hard. "That I made you feel unwanted after spending your entire life making sure I never felt that way." The honesty in his voice nearly shattered me, because sometimes healing begins the moment someone finally tells the truth without defending themselves. Years have passed since then. Ethan is 6 now. Every Sunday, he video calls me proudly showing new drawings and missing teeth. Emily and I will probably never have a perfect relationship, but we have a real one now. Honest, careful, respectful. And Jason? He never forgot the silence that followed his choices. Neither did I. But forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means refusing to let pain become your identity forever. Sometimes people think strength means cutting family off permanently. Sometimes it does. But sometimes strength is finally loving yourself enough to stop accepting love that humiliates you. And the strangest part of all, the moment I stopped begging to be treated like family, was the exact moment they finally understood my worth. If this story touched you in any way, take a moment to subscribe because so many parents silently carry this kind of heartbreak and never talk about it. And if you're a mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather who has ever felt pushed aside by the people you sacrificed everything for, I want you to know something. Your love still mattered, even if they failed to appreciate it at the time. Comment below, what hurt you most in this story? Jason blocking the hospital door, or only remembering his mother when they needed help? And be honest, if you were Margaret, would you have gone back to help them?